Now, next topic, or we can say next block of business statistics is regression. Now, we will study the regression. After understanding correlation, now we can easily understand the concept of regression. So, like in correlation, in regression also, we study the variables. So if we talk about the meaning of regression, we can say that regression is a study basically of measuring the relationship between associated variables. So whereas one variable is dependent variable and another variable is independent variable. So basically regression is a statistical technique which is used to find out the relationship between the dependent variable and independent variable. Like in correlation, we study that how we can find out the or we find out the relationship or correlation among the variables. Okay, so in this we find out the relationship between associate variables in which one is dependent and another one is dependent variable. Okay, so the concept of regression is first given in basically 1877. When the concept is given first in 1877. Okay, in 1877, and the concept is given by Sir Francis Galton. Let me write it. Sir Francis Galton. So this concept of regression is first introduced in 1877 by Sir Francis Galton. Basically, he developed the concept of regression to measure the relationship of height and the relationship of parents and their children, to identify or to measure the relationship of height between parents and their children. So, regression analysis is a statistical tool to study the nature and extent of functional relationship between two or more variables. So it is not necessary that we only study only one one variable or two variable. In this, basically two or more variable can be studied. Okay, so for identifying the relationship between two or more variable and to estimate or we can say to predict the unknown value of dependent variable from the known value of the independent variable. So in this, the prediction of one variable is done on the basis of the another variable. Okay, so this is basically the prediction of one variable is done on the basis of the prediction of other variable. We can do this with the help of regression analysis. So when the variable that form the basis from predicting another variable is known as the independent variable. Okay, and the variable that is predicted is known as the dependent variable. Okay, so independent variable remain the same on the basis of independent variable, dependent variable changes. Okay, so let's assume with an example. Let's take an example of economics of price and demand. Okay, if we know that there are two variables, one is price and another one is demand, let's assume price is X and demand is Y. So, two variable price and demand are closely related, we can find out the most probable value of x for a given value of y. So what we can do, we can find out the most probable value of price if we have given the value of demand, or the most probable value of demand from the given value of price. Okay, so similarly, if we know that the amount of tax and the rise in the price of the commodity are closely related with each other, we can find out the certain amount of tax limit. So this is how we use regression analysis on both the variables. So now if we talk about the use of regression analysis, so basically regression analysis is a statistical tool which is used for identifying the relationship between dependent and independent variables. So it provides estimate of value of the dependent variable from the value of the independent variable. Okay, we can find out the value of dependent variable if we have given the value of independent variable. Okay, so it is basically used to obtain a measure of the error, basically, which involve in using the regression line, a basis for estimation. So in regression, we find a regression line with the help of dependent and independent variable, which we will discuss later. So with the help of regression analysis, we can obtain a measure of degree which is associated, or we can say which is correlated, that exists between the two variables. Okay, so it is highly valuable tool in economics and in business research also, since most of the problem of the economic analysis based on cause and effect relationship can be find out with the help of regression. So, as in economics, there are various problems or various types of economic analysis which are based on the cause and effect relationship. Okay, like price and demand, price and supply, demand and supply. So, this can be easily find out with the help of regression analysis. So, if we talk about, now we have understood the meaning of regression. If we have to discuss the difference between the correlation and regression, we can say that regression basically measure the degree and direction of relation between the variables. What correlation did? Correlation basically find out the degree and direction of relationship between the variables. Whereas regression is that measure in which the nature and extent of average relationship between two or more variable in terms of their original units of the data can be measured. So what we do in correlation? In correlation, we measure degree and direction of relation among the variables. While in regression, we measure the nature and extent of average relationship between the variables, and we measure it in terms of unit of the data. And we can say that in correlation, basically it is a relative measure which show the basically associate between the variables, whereas we can say that in regression it is absolute measure of relationship. Okay, in correlation is a relative measure and regression is basically a absolute measure of relationship. So we can say that in correlation, basically correlation coefficient is independent of change of both the origin and scale, but in regression coefficient is basically is independent of change of origin but not scale. So in both regression and correlation, we calculate coefficient for correlation, coefficient of correlation, and for regression, coefficient of regression. In correlation coefficient basically is independent unit of measure, whereas regression coefficient is not independent of unit of measure. Okay, when we express the relationship in correlation, so expression of the relationship between the variables is range from +1 to -1. In correlation, expression of relationship between variable range is +1 to -1, where +1 to -1. And in basically in correlation, expression of the relationship between variable may be in any form, which we can do with the help of equation of x and equation of y. If we have to find out the equation of y, then a plus b x. Okay, if we have to find out the equation of basically x, then it's become opposite of it. Okay, so this is the basic difference of correlation and regression which we have discussed. So now let's discuss the next concept. Topic is regression type. As regression is a statistical method which used to determine the strength and characteristics of the relationship between one dependent variable and the series of the other independent variables. So the use of regression is basically in various fields, in finance, in economics, in discipline, etc., in many fields. So regression basically used to analyze the relationship among the variables. So the objective of, or we can say the types of regression basically are three types: simple regression, multiple regression, and non-linear regression. It is simple, multiple regression, and non-linear regression. So what is simple regression? Basically, it is used to predict a continuous dependent variable based on a single independent variable. So continuous dependent variable means the data for which we are going to analyze the regression should be in continuous terms. Okay, we can say on a scalar data. Okay, on a scale data. Okay, so we have to use to predict a continuous dependent variable based on the single independent variable. Okay, so in simple linear regression, basically should be used when there is only a single independent variable. So there should be a single independent variable while calculating the simple regression. And when we talk about the multiple regression, it is basically used to predict again continuous dependent variable, but multiple independent variable. Okay, in this we can take multiple independent variable and continuous dependent variable. Here in case of multiple regression, there can be multiple independent variable, but in case of simple regression, there can be a single independent variable. Now let's talk about the non-linear regression. So in non-linear regression, basically it shows the relationship between the dependent variable and independent variable from a non-linear pattern. Okay, from where? From the non-linear pattern, we find out the relationship among the variables. So basically it provides flexibility in modeling a wide range of functional form. So basically it helps in finding out the relationship between those variable, independent variable and dependent variable, which follow a non-linear pattern. Okay, there is a no linear pattern in this. non-linear regression. So, what we understand from regression is that regression basically is a statistic technique that is relates a dependent variable to one or more independent variable. There can be single independent variable or there can be multiple independent variable, and it can be also possible that there is non-linear pattern among the relationship between dependent variable and independent variable. So if we talk about the regression model, so a regression model basically is able to show whether there is a change in observed in the dependent variable or the associates with change in one or more of the independent variable. So basically it does this by essentially determining a best fit model or best fit line and seeing how the data is dispersed around the line. So when we draw the regression line, we can find out the best fit line with the help of regression line. Okay. So now let's understand what is regression line basically. Okay. Let me remove it first. So now let's understand regression line. What is basically regression line in regression? So in regression line, regression line are the line of best fit expressing mutual average relationship between the two series or the two variables. So these line give best estimate of one variable for any given value of the other variable. So when we find out the relationship or the nature of the variable, one is independent variable and the dependent variable, so it can be best expressed, or we can express the mutual average relationship between the two series with the help of regression line. So why there are regression line? So we can say that when we talk about the regression line, so there are two regression line. So basically there are two regression line. Okay. One is X on Y and Y on X. Okay. So there are always two regression line. So why there are two regression line? Okay. So let's understand. In case of two variable, there are always two line of regression. As in regression, we are going to study two variables. Okay, one is IDV, which is independent variable, and another one is dependent variable, which we also say DV. Okay, so in regression we are studying two variables. One is independent and the dependent variable. So that's why there are always two regression lines. If both the variables are assumed, let's assume the variable, both variable x and y. There are two variables x and y. So we shall have two regression line of one of x on y and another one is y on x. Okay. If we assume two variable x and y, so these are the two variables. So what will be the regression line? X on y and y on x. Okay, so this is how. So the regression line basically of x on y, and most probably the value of x for the given value of y, and the regression line of y on x give the more probable value of y on x. So this is how it will work when we have to calculate the regression line for the two variables. So in regression there are two variables. Basically we have to study. So if both variables are assumed, then there will always be two regression line in regression line. So basically, we can say that in regression analysis, no single variable is permanently dependent or the independent variable. So we have given two variables. Any two may be assumed as a dependent variable and the other one is dependent variable. Okay, so this is not permanent that the x variable, suppose assume we have two variable x and y. So this is not permanent that this is dependent variable and this is independent variable. This is not fixed and this is not permanent. So it is assumed, we have to assume that this is the dependent variable and this is the independent variable, or this is the independent variable and y is the dependent variable. So this is assumed by the person who is going to calculate the regression analysis. So if the value of x is given and the value of y is to be predicted, then x will be the independent and the y will be dependent. Suppose we can say that if we have given the value of x in a given when we have two variables x and y. So if the value of x is given and we have to find out the value of we can say that y. So the value of on the other hand, we can say that if the value of x is predicted on the basis of the value of y, so then the y will be the independent and the x will be the dependent variable. So this is how we will determine the dependent variable and independent variable for the regression line. So basically, regression line are drawn in the form of a line of best fit. Okay, we can say these are drawn for the line of best fit. Okay. So the concept of line of best fit basically based on the principle of least square, which basically stipulates that the sum of square of deviation of different value from this line shall be minimum. Okay, so this is how assumption of best of line fit is very necessary and important in the regression line. Now let's understand the exception of regression line. So generally there are two regression lines. So there are always two regression line in regression, as in regression we are studying two variables, one is dependent and the other one is independent. So there are two regression line. If there is either perfect positive or perfect negative correlation between the two regression, so if there is perfectly positive or perfectly negative correlation between the two variables, which can we say that plus minus 1, so there will be only one line of regression. Okay, when there is a perfect correlation or basically perfect correlation or perfectly positive or perfectly negative correlation between the two variables x or y, as we have assumed two variables x and y. Okay, if there is a perfectly positive or perfectly negative correlation among these variables, okay, plus 1 or minus 1, then we can say that there will be only one regression line, because in such case both the line basically coincide. Okay, what if suppose we are drawing It is perfectly positive. Okay, if both the variables are perfectly positive, okay, both the x and y is plus 1, so then both the equation will lie on this straight line, and if it is negative, then they will lie in this line, both the equation. Okay, so let's understand it with the help of the equation also. Let me share it first. Okay, let's understand it with the help. So let me draw equation of y on x. Let's draw first y on x. Okay. Now the equation will be like this: y minus y bar. Okay. Y bar is the mean of y. Okay. Sum of y divided by n number of observation is y bar, plus minus standard deviation of y divided by standard deviation of x. Okay, and then bracket x minus x bar. Okay, so we can say that we can write it by y minus y bar divided by standard deviation of y, okay, is equal to x minus x bar divided by standard deviation of x. Okay, so what we have done in this, we have the cross multiply. We can say that we have taken this standard deviation of y here. Okay, so this is the equation of y on x. Okay, just a second. So now let's draw the second equation also, x on y, as this is y on x. Now let's draw the another equation, which is x on basically y. So the equation will be opposite, x minus x bar, okay, is equal to plus minus standard deviation of x divided by standard deviation of y, bracket y minus y bar. Okay, so now what we will do, bring this standard deviation x below the x minus x bar. Okay, is equal to plus minus y minus y bar divided by standard deviation of y. Okay, so this will be the equation of x on y, and when we discuss the equation y on x, that is y minus y bar divided by standard deviation of y is equal to plus minus x bar upon standard deviation of x, standard deviation of x. So this is the regression line. Now I hope you all have understood the regression line and meaning of regression line, also the type of regression. So now what we will do, we will discuss the question of regression in detail on the basis of the meaning, as meaning, definition and the regression line is clear. You all have understood this. Now we will start with the question part.